this program is designed for IRA and real estate investing. It's not an IRA presentation. This is directed toward real estate investors. So the techniques that we're going to be teaching in here are going to be applicable to both IRA investing and also your general investing. It's not exclusive to just the IRA. And the question Dustin had brought up my background. To give you a little idea, I've been in the real estate business for about 40 years. I just had my birthday, and I didn't realize I'd gotten so old. But nevertheless, I started off with being a real estate agent and broker. I've owned escrow companies. I've owned what you guys call top closing companies, business opportunities, and a variety of a background, which led me up to the IRA business. And it's a great, fun business. But the real estate business is my absolute total passion, and it's just like you guys. It's something that I absolutely love. So, and I've been involved with about 6,000 real estate transactions over my career, either as an investor, purchaser, or in some format of directing the transaction, and that doesn't even include what I've done with the IRA. So this is truly an area that I enjoy talking to groups like yours. So I want to get the easy stuff out of the way first, which is how to contact us. And our website is AmericanIRA.com. And getting additional information, you can call us toll-free at 866-7500-IRA, which is 1-866-7500-472, and info@AmericanIRA.com. So those are just a couple of quick ways to get a hold of us. Now, as always, with any provider of services, we need to do our disclosure. And American IRA LLC does not provide investment advice or endorse any products. All information and materials are educational purposes only. All parties are encouraged to consult attorneys, accountants, financial advisors before entering in any type of investment that's contemplated. American IRA, a little background on our company. We're a national provider of self-directed IRAs and solo 401ks. And as I've mentioned, I've been in the business, it says 29 years. That's just how long I've been utilizing self-directed IRAs. American IRA was founded by me in 2004, and we administer all types of retirement accounts that we'll be getting into that involves real estate, private lending, limited liability companies, precious metals, and a whole litany of other items. And the interesting thing, or the fun thing about my staff, is that we have a certified IRA specialist by the American Bankers Association that are on staff that are highly skilled at answering questions. And we also have a company on retainer that when we have the cutting edge questions, which many of our clients, because of the level of creativity that they have, want to know answers to, and we do try to seek those answers out. But as a reminder, we can't give advice, but we can give you information and get you in the right direction. We've discovered over the time is that this company values is, when you see this presentation, you're going to understand that knowledge, education, we try to do everything to the best of our abilities for our clients in everything that we do. Okay, we build local relationships that are lasting. And the last one on here is trust is kind of overly used, but what we're trying to do with our clientele base is we give them the facts, we give it to them straightforward. When necessary, we speak to their professionals, attorneys, CPAs, or financial planners, whatever, in order to give them the facts that they can take back and they can research and they can move forward with their investing. What American IRA does is we report to the Internal Revenue Service, and these are a couple of forms that are common in the industry of 5498 and 1099, which you don't need to know about. We pay and receive income. We request the required documents to process the transactions. We accept contributions and process all the distributions. And what we don't do is we do not provide investment advice. We do not sell or endorse investment products, and we are not regulators, nor do we approve transactions. And I think that's a critical distinction between us and a large securities firm, is we don't offer any products, or we don't say these are great funds or this is a great piece of real estate or whatever. That's totally up to the client to make that decision. And many people ask, well, how come I haven't heard about this before? I mean, it's all over it's much more common now, but it's all over various periodicals and online. There's just a few of them that have been featuring this, and a lot of local papers. There's a lot of knowledge now, but oddly enough, it's still a very small portion of the overall financial industry in terms of the self-direction, truly self-directed, because most accounts are self-directed, even a securities one, but you're only allowed to direct into securities. Reasons for our services. One of the things is that in order to have this type of industry, you must have a service like ours to act as a record keeper custodian, because much like a larger securities firm, such as in this case, we'll talk about Schwab or Merrill Lynch, when you buy stocks, you've got to have somebody to hold that asset. Well, that's what we do. Okay, and we do business unlike Schwab or Fidelity or some of the larger facilities. We actually pick up the phone. We do business the old-fashioned way. So when you call my office, unless everybody's on the phone taking care of a client, you're going to get a live person to pick up the phone. You're not going to get punch 1, punch 2, punch 3. It's something that I particularly dislike, and I intend to maintain this position for as long as I'm alive and well. We offer personalized service catered to each client's needs. We actually listen to what they're saying, and we work very hard at achieving their goals without, of course, giving advice. And the education, which is what we're doing tonight, is one of the keys to the success. Many of you have joined this organization, or should have joined this organization, this Atlanta RIA, in order to further your own personal education in the real estate business. And as you'll see when we get into these case studies here, that was a critical function of how this person was successful in what they're doing. We've grown our company to over 250 million assets in the last 7 years, so we're not a brand new company. And clients are going to invest in, other than this securities, which we've talked about, real estate, private companies, loans, and just an unbelievable amount of other assets. You can access your account online, similar to what you would with a securities firm. And our goal is to make it easy. The common, one of the feedbacks that we have gotten before is the concept is that it's a difficult process, which is absolutely not the case. This is a form that's available on our website, and it's a very simple form that we put together that says it's really a 3-step process to open an account. It's not that difficult. You open the account, you fund the account from an either existing account, you make a contribution, and then when you're ready to make an investment, step 3, you give us a bi-direction letter, make sure the funds are in the account. You read and approve all documents, which we're going to cover in detail. And the comment on the right is what people in that little box that says, people are amazed at how easy it is to open a self-directed account. It is just as easy as opening a checking account at your local bank. They simply open the account, put their money in, purchase assets with their money in their self-directed account. There is no mystery to this. It's no more difficult than opening any other type of financial account. Transaction process. I'm covering some things up front, and we're going to get into the significant transactions that are being chronicled here that are going to, I think, in some cases amaze you. But the transaction process, every one of these case studies that we're going to cover tonight all follow the same transaction process. So I thought what I would do is set this out in advance so you get a feel for it. So when I'm talking about this process, you will understand it. All self-directed IRA transactions follow the same easy process. Clients submit their bi-direction letter to American IRA outlining the purchase details, identifying the parties involved. American IRA works with the closing professionals, attorneys, realtors, insurance companies, title companies as needed. The closing documents are prepared by the appropriate professionals. We don't prepare documents. The closing professionals submit the prepared documents to American IRA for review as to vesting only. Our job is to make sure that the asset is properly titled in the name of the IRA. And it's not just the asset, it's also the insurance policy, the title insurance policy, or any other sets of documents that might be applicable to the transaction. And all titling is American IRA LLC for benefit of client's name IRA type, whether that would be a Roth or a traditional or SEP or a simple. And then American IRA submits all documents related to the transaction to the client for approval. You approve everything. We don't make decisions based on what we think you want to do. It's only after you approve the documents. Client reviews documents and signs read and approved. American IRA signs the documents for closing on behalf of the client's IRA. Then American IRA sends the funds to close the deal as outlined in the bi-direction letter. And believe it or not, it is that simple. There is nothing that you're going to do with the self-directed IRA that you would not do if the IRA was not involved, except have us sign the documents on your behalf instead of you signing them. That's the only difference. Everything else is the same. The other thing I wanted to address is that is self-directed IRA investing safe? I think that's in the newspapers from time to time, people talking about, is it safe? Is it something that I can do? You know, what protects me? Many times these questions will come up. So here's some key points that you need to keep in mind. All uninvested cash is FDIC insured. All assets are vested in the client's name at the time of purchase. American IRA LLC for benefit of client's name IRA. And as a note, FDIC insurance only covers cash balances, not once you make a purchase of a non-traditional asset. All credit card transactions are safe American IRA certified by Security Metrics. All accounting is processed through a top-rated trust accounting system. We maintain professional insurance coverage, including crime shield policy and errors and omissions policy. Investing within a self-directed IRA is completely within the investor's control. Okay, so is it safe? Yes, to the extent that the investor controls it. But here's something that is overlooked many times when we're talking about safety between the securities industry and, let's say in this case, we're talking about the real estate industry, because each investment has its own characteristics as to safety. On the real estate investment arena, take a look at this example. A $100,000 investment in 2000 inside a self-directed IRA in a single-family home. Okay, 2012, value doesn't matter. The investor is not selling the property, so it may have gone up and it may have gone down. But here's an absolute certainty. It had 12 years worth of rental income so far, and it's still free and clear. Versus investing in securities, which are absolutely out of your control, out of the investor's control completely, or anybody else for that matter. $100,000 invested in 2000 in Washington Mutual Bank, 2012 value, zero. Washington Mutual Bank was the biggest bank in the country when it failed in the early 2000s. So there is no guarantee in the securities industry any more than there is in the self-directed industry. But at least in the self-directed industry, you have a way of controlling your risk by investing in what you know and understand, and you can do your own due diligence. Here's the type of investments accounts that you can utilize. It's not just an IRA. There's a traditional IRA, which is the one you would be familiar with, which allows for you to make a tax deductible contribution. The Roth on the far right is the one that you hear a lot about, and that's the one we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the account that is absolutely tax-free when the profits come out at the end. However, you do not get a deduction when you make the contribution. A spousal IRA can be either a traditional or a Roth, and the way that works is that if you're only allowed, if you're under 50, to put away $5,000 a year, but if you have a non-working spouse, the non-working spouse also is eligible for an IRA, either traditional or Roth, that they too can put away the same $5,000. So if you think about it, a husband and wife, even though only one works, whichever one, depends on your personal family situation, both of them can have an account, so you actually can put away $10,000 a year in either a traditional or a Roth, providing you're not over the limit on a Roth account. The other three types of accounts are employer-based plans, which is a SEP. So if you are self-employed, we provide servicing for SEP accounts, simplified employee pension plans, which is an employer-funded plan. We also provide services for the simple, which is a employee-funded plan with a contribution from the employer. And then the solo 401k, which we are going to talk about in the second half of this presentation, which is part 2, is a plan that is for people who are self-employed, either sole proprietor, LLC, corporation, and they don't have any common law employees, meaning that they don't have anybody that's on W-2 for greater than 1,000 hours a year. It can be husband or wife that's in a business. It could be a couple of partners. And I'm not going to cover the solo 401k at all tonight, other than a couple of mentions because it was in the case study. But the solo 401k, providing that you qualify for it, is basically a self-directed account on steroids. It gives you so many features and opportunities that it's absolutely incredible. So that's for another time, but just you need to know that it's aware that it's there. And other type of accounts, and these are tax advantaged accounts, but they're not IRAs, which is a Coverdell education account. It is an account that you can put away for anybody that you care to do it. Typically it's grandchildren, children, and that too can be self-directed. And then a health savings account, you can put money away from that, and that works in many ways like a Roth. You put the money in there, except you get a deduction, and you can pay your medical expenses out of it, and it comes out absolutely tax-free, and you pay the medical expenses. So it's a very great tool, and we're going to discuss how these accounts can be utilized together in this actual presentation, which I think you'll find very interesting. This is a great slide because what we try to address is, and we're going to address in this presentation specifically, is how are real estate transactions found. We've got 60% of all the transactions in this slide. This was prepared by a very large company. Networking is number one, which you're doing by being a member of your RIA group. And if you're not, you should be signing up. Then the second part is real estate agents. So you've got 60% of the transactions if you're looking for a way to find your deals. And then 10% is, driving or walking the neighborhood and so forth on down this list. But the point is that if you're looking for transactions, 70% of it is going to come in the first three categories, but 60% is in the just networking and real estate agents that you learn to work with. What you're going to learn tonight, and I wanted to get this out up front because I know that I have to go through some areas that are not as exciting as they could be, but they're extremely important to understand the case studies. So what you're going to get tonight is investment options. We're going to need to talk about prohibited transactions. I'm going to tell you what ABP is, which is the keys to success. An in-depth look at the successful investment techniques of David G. You're going to become familiar with David G. He has used his Roth account to grow from $6,800 to $293,000 in just a little over 4 years, and including one investment that yielded him $49,750 in a very small amount of money. So this is what you're going to learn if you stick it out through the end. And if you have to go early, please take advantage of listening to the repeat on the website that is being offered to you. Second part of this is going to be, the first presentation is going to be beginner to intermediate to just below upper intermediate. The second presentation is going to be upper intermediate. It is going to be advanced, and it's going to be creative. There wasn't enough in the word advanced to really, in my opinion, highlight what creative truly is, and it's going to, this presentation will include utilization of leverage, investing in income properties, mobile home parks, apartment complexes, IRA-owned LLCs, which is a hot topic right now, solo 401ks, and using a retirement plan to generate current income. So that's going to be in part 2, which is going to be on March 15th, I believe, 2012. Okay, first concept is what can you invest in? You can invest in trust deeds, mortgages, notes, rental properties, condos, raw land, lease options, building bonds, commercial paper, like and unlike exchanges. And what that simply means is you can buy a house and sell it and buy LLC shares, which are unlike exchanges because there's no taxable consequence. You can joint venture with somebody, which simply means you're going to do one transaction with them. You can use promissory notes, do notes on mobile homes, secured or unsecured, private placements, which are to a large extent a portion of a business, LLC shares straight up. You can buy businesses, precious metal, and tax liens. And in your particular state, tax liens are Georgia. The tax liens can be quite attractive to investors if you're not familiar with it. It's something you should probably want to learn. Okay, second concept is prohibited transactions. With every great opportunity, you also have to be aware of consequences. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the prohibited transactions before we get into the case studies. The IRS rules and regulations and what's prohibited. If you use retirement funds to purchase property, you cannot live in the property until you take it as a distribution. To put it simply, you cannot receive current benefits from your retirement account. And what does that mean? That means if you have a home at the beach, you can't use it for 14 days a year. It has to be held for investment purposes only. If you have the need for a personal residence, you can't do that either. So those are some of the things that are just the very straightforward. You can't deal with yourself or use the assets of your retirement plan until you retire and you take it as a distribution. Now, disallowed investments. The interesting thing about the Internal Revenue Service Code, it does not tell you what you may invest in. It tells you what you may not invest in. And this is the list of what you may not invest in. Works of art, and you certainly don't want to invest in any rugs or antiques. I'm particularly fascinated by the fact that they've eliminated my ability to invest in rugs, because it just seems to me that specifically was something that everybody would want to do. I'm being facetious here, as you probably know. Any metal or gem, stamps or coins, alcoholic beverages, that's another one. Any other tangible personal property specified by the Secretary of the Treasury. At this point, it's pretty nominal. And then you can invest in U.S. government minted gold or silver coins and bullion. So you can invest in that, and that's and gold IRAs are quite popular these days also. Prohibited transaction is defined as any improper use of the IRA or the plan by a plan participant or a disqualified person. And the disqualified person is an employer of a participating plan. So, for example, if you have a set plan and you're a disqualified person from making a transaction with your own set plan. If you have a partner that owns 10% or more of the company, they're disqualified. A fiduciary of the plan, like a trustee or an advisor, anybody with a really high salary in your business that could have an influence over it, that's a prohibited person. And any other employee that's organization or any members that are covered by the plan. The plan in this case being defined as the IRA. The following are disqualified persons, and this is very easy to understand. It's not that complex. If you just think about the multi-level marketing where they go upline and downline, yeah, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the members of the family, spouse, ancestors, direct descendants, and any spouses of their direct descendants. That's your prohibited people, and any of the entities that they own or control of at least 50% or more of the total stock of the corporation, capital interest or profit in the estate, and beneficial interest in the trust or estate. I want to sum that up for you. Think about it like this. Your parents, your children, any entities that they own or control. That's what it really boils down to. Aunts, uncles, cousins, okay, are not included. It says at the bottom of this particular slide, it says any siblings or relative which may influence a decision related to a transaction may be considered a disqualified person. That's what I put in there because you can't just say that cousins, aunts, uncles, and are not going to be, or brothers or sisters are not going to be prohibited people, because it does in fact go deeper than that. But the specific disqualified people, as it says on the slide, are you and your spouse, lineal ascents and their spouses, lineal descents and their spouses, any fiduciary of the IRA, an employee of American IRA, as well as their spouses or ancestors, and an attorney or a CPA who actually does work directly for the IRA, not just for you specifically, anyone providing services to the IRA, as well as their employees and blood relatives. So those are some of the things that are disqualified persons. And it goes, there's many other variations to this, but that's the surface of it that you have to be aware of. After you get past that, then there's not a lot to be overly concerned about. Examples of a disqualified persons is you cannot engage in a transaction, direct or indirect, with any disqualified persons. I'm going to deal with that first line there and then make sure that we're clear on that. Many investors want to ask the question, well, what if I do blank? And the blank is this. I sell the house to my brother sells it back to my IRA. Is that a prohibited transaction? Because the brother is not, on the surface, a disqualified person. Well, the Internal Revenue Service says, yes, it is, and that's called the indirect rule. You can't do anything directly or indirectly that you can't do directly. So that's the indirect rule. Or sometimes the attorneys or CPAs will refer to it as a step transaction. So you can't do that. Selling, exchanging, or leasing property, we've already talked about that. Lending money or extending credit. You cannot lend money to your IRA, you cannot extend credit to your IRA, and you cannot put your IRA up for a loan. It's a prohibited transaction. And furnishing goods, services, or facilities. I'm going to get into that in the case study, so I will leave that particular line to a later date, but just read that: furnishings, goods, services, or facilities, and I think it'll become clear to you in a few more slides. And the two key points of the IRAs and real estate is no self-dealing and no personal use. And if you just ask yourself, am I self-dealing, or am I using this personally, or am I receiving any current benefits, then those are simple questions you can ask yourself to find out if it could be a prohibited transaction. What we're going to go into tonight is some case studies, and these are actual case studies by a client. I did the interview last Friday, a week from tomorrow. And the story is quite fascinating, and it's a story that is by a real person doing real business today. We're going to talk about land banking. We're going to talk about secured loans for a mobile home. We're going to talk about single-family sale to a wholesaler. And then we're going to talk about the practice makes perfect, the home run, the hat trick, hole-in-one, 100-yard run back, and the game-winning shot from half court. I didn't cover the poker scenarios, but you get the idea. And these are case studies from one of our clients' accounts. David G. has generously agreed to share his story and give us permission to share it with you. And at the bottom, this is what I hear a lot. It says, American IRA, it's in quotes I put, it's great to have real folks to talk about their retirement accounts. And that's what we are. We're real folks, and we can talk about it and help you and get you in the right direction. And we're here for our clients. Okay, we're going to talk about due diligence. This is not a IRA specific segment. What I decided was that since this is a course on investing in real estate that happens to be cloaked in the IRA function, we're going to be talking about due diligence during the case study. So I decided to put together a conversation on due diligence and give you a definition of that so that you can, going forward, you can understand what the responsibility is that you have as a real estate investor. And it's no different than you would have as whether it's the IRA making the purchase or you making the purchase as an individual. And this is not an all-inclusive slide. It's just a slide that incorporates many of the things that you would need to consider in your due diligence check. The definition of due diligence: an investigation. This comes directly out of one of the encyclopedias. An investigation of or an audit of a potential investment. Due diligence serves to confirm all material facts in regards to a sale / or purchase. As far as the real estate business is concerned, due diligence includes, but is not limited to, title review. You've got your inspections, which includes termite, radon, flood zone. You've got appraisal. You've got environmental assessment. You've got land use controls, permits for alterations and additions, which many times is overlooked. Professional consultation. You've got realtors, attorneys, legal advice. You've got surveyors. You have insurance agents. You've got your CPA for tax advice. And something that is many times overlooked in older properties with zoning is if the duplex that you're buying based on its income that's 65 years old but in great shape, can you rebuild that if it burns down to the ground? Because if you can't, you're not buying a duplex with a great income. You're buying a limited asset that cannot be duplicated to continue the revenue stream. So you're probably going to be overpaying if you're paying something that is not going to be able to be duplicated in case if it burns down. In all cases, you have to seek advice from professionals in helping you determine the due diligence items for your investment. To make it clear, this is for educational purposes only. An American IRA does not perform due diligence. That is absolutely the client's responsibility. Now I'm going to introduce David G., and that's who we're going to be talking about going forward. Who is David G.? What I decided to do when I put this presentation together is I put together something that is what everybody can do, because what we tend to run into many times in presentations is the presenter says, here's what you can do, okay? But they don't go into how do you do it, or what is the direction for me to look for. So what I decided to do in this presentation is we're going to talk about, to some extent, we already have what you can do, and here's how a person who is a real live person did it. And they didn't just do it in such a fashion that you can read about the guys that bought, or the people that bought one property and made themselves their $1 million and they got, the very first deal. Well, that's all well and good, but if I had to pay my bills on that particular story, I don't think my bills would have been paid the last 40 years. You pay your bills by hitting singles, couple of doubles, and then you knock occasional home run. And that's how you really pay your bills in the real estate business. Anything other than that is something that you just hope for but don't count on. Now, David G. in 1996 was a 50% owner in a fitness studio. In 1998, his father gave him a Carlton Sheets course. Now, Carlton Sheets is not on the TV as much as he used to, but He had a course for $199, and it's I actually believe this course is a great course. It covers a lot of stuff. It doesn't go into an extreme amount of detail, but it certainly is enough to get you curious about the real estate business. And so that piqued his interest in investing. So in 1998, David didn't waste any time. He purchased his first rental duplex for $87,000. Now, since he could not get financing, he did not qualify. He didn't have any verifiable income, and his wife didn't have any verifiable income. He used his credit card to cover the $10,000 down payment, and he got owner financing, because that's one of the things that was mentioned in the Carlton Sheets class. So he buys his first duplex with a credit card, and I became aware of David because he did a couple of conversations or minor lectures on using a credit card to finance real estate. It's not a recommended procedure, but it worked out in this particular case. In 1998, he purchased his primary residence, which was owner financed. And up until this point, David had the rental duplex, but he did not have his own personal residence. They were renting. From 1998, from 2000, David purchased 10 properties incorporating a buy and hold strategy, mostly owner financing. He said that he didn't really get any kind of bank financing, and he was able to get commercial financing on a couple of the last deals that he did with the buy and hold strategy. He liked the buy and hold strategy, which, by the way, is this cornerstone to great wealth. You know, and there's some great material on that. We could talk about it at a different point. But David G. said that when he got to the point where his properties were taking too much time, his buy and hold strategy in 2000, because you got to remember, he just started in 98, 97, 98 doing this. So he bought these properties. Well, they don't cash flow. This was in 98. This isn't in 2012 where you've got properties that you can buy and have them cash flow. So he didn't have any positive cash flow, and his business was doing marginal. So he discovered wholesaling, which we're going to get into in a second. But one of the quotes that he said that about wholesaling, he says, David G. said, when the wholesaling dried up, the rental income from my buy and hold properties is the thing that kept me afloat, as opposed to leaving the business because you could no longer flip properties. And if you're prior to 2008, you'll understand perfectly what I'm talking about. If you're not, in 2008, financing dried up, so the wholesaling business dried up to a large extent, and then now it's being done in a slightly different fashion, still successfully, but a slightly different fashion. So in 2000, I mentioned that the non-payment of tenants and repairs, and David listened to a national expert on wholesaling, and a month later he purchased his first flip. So from 2001 through 2005, he purchased 5 properties a year, maintaining his buy and hold strategy, also incorporating wholesale. So David adapted to the situation. In 2003, he closed his fitness studio. And as a background, this is all important because you need to understand that David is a smart guy, as everybody that's listening to this is. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taking their time to learn this. But he's not a 227 IQ. He's an average, everyday person. He got a college degree. He worked in retail when he came out of college. He didn't like that. Didn't have any money. As I mentioned earlier, he used his credit cards to finance his first real estate transaction. He had absolutely no real estate experience. And I didn't make this stuff up. These are actual quotes to some extent that I've gleaned from the conversation with David, but he joined a local real estate investors club to increase his knowledge of real estate investing through the various educational opportunities that these organizations offer to their members for minimal annual fees. For $100, $150 a year, you have unlimited meetings. You have unbelievable opportunities to interact with other investors, both beginning and experienced, and you have educational opportunities. And you'll see why the education is so important as we move forward in these presentations. When did David open his IRA account? Now we're going to get into the transactions. In August of 2005, David G. opened a self-directed account. He had heard about self-directed IRAs through a seminar that I did. He opened a self-directed Roth because he wanted an account that grows tax-free, allows for future distributions that are tax-free forever. The one thing you got to understand about a Roth, once it's qualified, it's tax-free forever. He funded his Roth IRA with a direct, non-taxable transfer. Many people say, is there any consequence to me transferring from my current provider to a self-directed account? What is sometimes overlooked is they're the same account. We do the same job as the securities industry, except we allow you to invest in different type of assets as opposed to just securities. So they did a non-taxable transfer from two previously established Roth IRAs in the amount of $6,800, $3,800, and $3,000. That was his funding for the account. Now, why did David G. wait until January 2007 to open his first directed account? Well, simple. David G. had lost his confidence in the Wall Street. And even though he didn't have an investment picked out at the time, he opened his account. He had confidence that he would find a worthwhile future investment to direct his retirement funds to. What you have to consider is that when many times what we find is that the client says, well, I'll open an account when I find something. Well, if you wait till you find something and you find a very, very good deal, there is a time frame to open these accounts. We can do it very quickly. However, getting the money from provider A to us does take time, anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks, and sometimes in some cases longer if they drag their feet. So you've got to be prepared to make the investment, and tripping over a couple of pennies of perceived return, maybe interest, that you may think you're going to get, or the stock market, hopefully it doesn't go down before you make the move, then is as David G. says here in his next paragraph, he says, he also felt like entering into a new area of investment is something that first step to carefully, like a first date. Okay, you're introduced to the person you know you'd like to go on a date with. You set the date in advance. You're not worried about getting married. You just want to get to know this person. What's a similar situation when you're going in any kind of venture? And then you educate yourself about the relationship. In this case, that relationship is with self-directed IRA investing in whatever you choose to do, whether it be real estate or some other asset. You move forward only after you discover that this is a match made in heaven. And when you discover the power of self-direction, the power of compounding, and the power of tax-free money, if you have a Roth coming out at the back end, then you move forward fast. And David G., in fact, did move forward fast. And here's his story. Deal one. And this was January 2007. By the way, I should tell you there are 30 of these transactions that have occurred between January 2007 and February of 2012. We're getting ready to close a transaction for him. I believe we just closed it. His first one was a land banking transaction. And land banking for you it's a fancy word for buying land with the idea that it's going to go up in the future. Now, this is a very simple first transaction because David felt, and I do too, is that, you don't have to be horribly creative to make money in the real estate business. You just have to be persistent. Do something that's clean and neat, get it done, and move forward. Waiting for the grand slam, you could be waiting forever. David G. found a great first purchase. It was an oversized residential lot. Now, remember, this is back in 2007, before the economic downturn in 2008. So these numbers at the time, going up or down, it doesn't really matter because he still owns the property and plans on keeping it. It's a great piece of property in the Asheville area of western North Carolina, which is in the mountains. It was $18,900, and the maximum market value at the time was $31,000. Those numbers may sound small to you, but those are the actual numbers. I had water, sewer, had a phenomenal view in the mountains. The view is worth a lot. And then the additional upside potential to split the lot into two parcels. David G. stated, I wanted to test the water. This is his quote. I wanted to test the water with an easy investment. Land was a good choice because it requires very little management. Okay, so he made his first purchase. Now, he only had $6,800, so how did he buy a $18,900 piece of property? If you've been following the numbers, you may want to ask, is in 2005, he made his original $6,800 contribution. In 2006, he made a $4,000 contribution, which at the time was the maximum he could make during that year. And in 2007, he partnered with his Roth IRA, giving her Roth a 50% ownership interest in the half of the price, not including closing costs, was $9,450. Now, I want you to make a note. David G. partnered with his wife's IRA, her Roth IRA, which is also a tax-free vehicle, for a long-term hold to make the purchase, even though he cannot purchase. Remember we talked about prohibited transactions? Even though you cannot purchase from the wife or the husband or entities they own or control, children, parents, or other disqualified persons, is what I'm covering here again, he can partner with himself or any other persons at the time of acquisitions, whether it's an IRA or otherwise. So he can do that, as can you. So if you don't have a large account, you can still do a transaction by partnering up with somebody else and or your wife or your I should say your spouse as opposed to your wife. And the title is, as I mentioned before, I wanted to reiterate here that it's American IRA LLC for the benefit of David G. Roth IRA, an undivided 50% interest, and American IRA LLC FBO, that means for benefit of Mrs. David G. Roth IRA, an undivided 50% interest. So that's how the deal structure went together. Now, there's some other things that we want to cover to make some clarity on how this is affected by owning it in an IRA. The warranty deed is held in by American IRA in a fireproof safe, and the reality is, of course, that that's a recorded document. 50% of all expenses for the land are paid by David G's Roth, and the other 50% is paid by Mrs. David G's Roth. The individual, these are the things that need to be really clear on, so I made sure that we put these in these case studies. The individual is not allowed, David G. and his wife are not allowed to pay the expenses for the IRA or receive any income from the IRA. The IRA must take responsibility for the portion of the expenses and or income in exact relationship to the percentage the IRA invested in the purchase of that asset. In this case, 50%. So for example, you can't buy something and say, I think I will pay most of the expenses and then shift the income over to the other partner, whether it's an IRA or otherwise. You can't do that. David G. and his wife, parents, or entities they own or control are not allowed to use the land. Remember, we talked about the prohibited transactions. So you can't provide goods, services, or facilities. So David G., his wife, his children, his parents that are prohibited are not allowed to use the land. For example, camping, picnicking, walking the dog, or storage. My feeling was this was an absolutely perfect example of some of the simpler things that you wouldn't even think about that relate to the prohibited transaction. The IRS states the asset owned by the IRA must be for investment purposes only. Now, the question you're going to have in your mind by looking at this is, who knows that the IRS doesn't watch to see if they're walking the dog, camping, parking, picnicking, or on this land. They don't do that. Okay? Fair enough. However, the penalties are so high if you make a mistake that because they don't police it, that it could be as high as, for rounded numbers, 160% of the principal of the IRA. So when you're thinking about all these wonderful ways to do this, just keep in mind, just do it a very simple way that is non-prohibited. Don't try to skirt the rules. There are so many ways to make money in the real estate business and other businesses. You don't need to skirt the rules to take a chance on disqualifying your IRA. On that same vein, David G. hired someone to clear the land as needed. Neither David G. nor any prohibited persons are allowed to provide goods or services such as clearing land owned by the self-directed IRA. Very simple, straightforward, but many times overlooked in something in a scenario like this. David G.'s IRA obtained a liability policy for the land to protect from losses in the event someone entered the property and injured themselves. While this is not a requirement of the IRA, it is always just a good idea to insure yourself against potential financial loss. As a reminder, this policy must be purchased by and in the name of the IRA, not the account holders' names, which we've talked about. So, as I mentioned, each one of these transactions have their own little items that crop up that have to do with both A, real estate investing, and B, how is it affected in the IRA. And I'm fairly certain that making the translation from prohibited person to clearing the lot was not the first thing that you guys thought about when they bought the land. But it is something that needs to be considered in every transaction inside of a self-directed IRA. Deal 2. First one was January of 2007. The next one's March 2007. Secured loan for a mobile home. The brilliance of what has taken place with David G. is it's step by step by step. It's not, as I mentioned earlier, the magical bullet that hit the one transaction. Somebody made the $1 million in their first transaction. This is just good fundamental real estate. Okay, David G. used most of his Roth funds, if you're keeping track of the funds, buy the land in 2007. Okay, so he didn't have much money left in his account. David made a $2,000 contribution to facilitate the Roth IRA to need for capital to make the loan. He was allowed to make up the $4,000 contribution in 2007, but he only put $2,000 in. David decided to once again partner with his Roth IRA, with his wife's Roth IRA to fund the loan. And the question is, you may be asking, well, why partner? Well, both husband and wife have small balances in their Roths, and they both had a desire to build up their accounts. Okay, so the strategy is, just remember, at the time of acquisition, his IRA and your IRA can partner with anyone, including a prohibited person, as long as it's done at the time of acquisition. And since both of his account and his wife's account had small balances, partnering is a good strategy to help build up both accounts. And I mentioned earlier a Coverdell and a education account and a health savings account. The same strategy is employed over and over again in our office for other accounts that have low contribution limits and thus have smaller balances. For example, the Coverdell education account and the health savings account. We have had clients who have had as many as 7 different vestings on a piece of real estate, utilizing health savings accounts, their IRAs, their education account, and their business type of accounts such as a SEP. So it's a very good way to build up a small account. Now, how does David G. find these deals? The first one I probably don't recall mentioning, but it was simply became aware of that lot by his normal prospecting that the first one took place. Now the other one is, the question always comes up, well, how do I find deals? Okay, well, David G. became aware of this loan opportunity from a landscaper that had done some business that he had on his non-IRA properties. They mentioned he needed a loan to get a used mobile home that the banks were unwilling to lend on. Lenders generally do not like to finance older mobile homes. So what he did is he said, well, he called our office, can I make a loan on a mobile home? Absolutely, that's one of the things you can do. The loan amount was $4,000 secured by a 1985 Oakwood located in a mobile home park. The interest on the loan was 18% payable at $101.57 monthly for 60 months. Total profit based on the 50% ownership was $1,047 for that 60 months. Now, Where else can you find a place you can put $4,000 in this economy, that economy in 2007, that's going to pay you 18% on $4,000? This was a good way for him to get some money invested that is actually earning some money. And as a side note, this guy's paid on time perfectly. The loan terms were set out by David G. and his borrower, not American IRA. American IRA's role is a third-party administrator and not an advisor. So we're not going to negotiate the terms for you. You are going to tell us what the terms are, and then we're going to follow your directions. As part of the terms, the borrower paid all closing costs. Now, the closing costs in this case were nominal, but I made it sound like there was more to it than what it is. But keeping in mind that when you're doing loans, the legal, title, recording, certified mail fees, and American IRA fees. We charge fees, annual fees for our services, and there are costs and transaction fees that are applicable to an asset purchase. Well, this is not a requirement, but it's just good business. Think about it. If you get a loan from the bank, do they pay your fees? Not usually. So why should your IRA? Your IRA is the bank in this situation, and your borrower should pay the costs. And that is totally your decision whether you want to do that. Not ours. But it is something that you may want to consider when you're negotiating with a potential borrower to make a loan. I went back through this because I wanted to make sure that we tie in the first portion of this that says how to make a transaction and what's going on. David G. notified American IRA by submitting a letter of direction which outlined the terms and the participants. It's important that we know who is going to be involved. The IRA team with David, actually the IRA team helped David fill out the form. He happens to be local to our office, and we also do that by phone and fax, and any other time you may need some help with these forms, we're here to help you. David G. reviewed all the final documents, approved them, instructed American IRA to sign them on behalf of the Roth. And then American IRA signed all the documents. David G. does not sign any documents on behalf of your IRA. I'm going to repeat that. David G. does not sign any documents on behalf of his Roth IRA. The reason that this is important is if you don't remember anything else about this transaction, you're thinking about doing self-directed IRA investing, all you have to do is remember, don't sign anything that has to do with the asset ownership. Instruct American IRA to do it for you, and you won't get yourself into this situation, which is you sign a purchase contract, try to close on it, it's in the wrong name, wrong insurance, wrong title insurance, and you have an invalid contract because you can't legally bind your IRA, and it needs to be in the name of the IRA when you make the purchase. So just remember that, and you're going to be 99% ahead of, let's just say, much of what is being taught out there as far as the emphasis on the signatory and the simplicity of the process. And the process is only simple if you follow the process. The vesting of the note is, as I've told you before, American IRA LLC for the benefit of David G. Roth IRA, undivided 50%. Mrs. David G., undivided 50%. The original note is sent to American IRA LLC and placed in a fireproof safe. And when the note is paid off, Mr. and Mrs. David G. will give a letter of direction to American IRA to cancel the original note and send it to the borrower by certified mail. Once again, giving instructions to his provider, American IRA, to perform the function. He's not going to do it himself. Now let's talk about some key points. The landscaper is not a prohibited person. He's not providing services to the IRA. He's not a son, a daughter. It's not a prohibited transaction. So it was not a prohibited transaction for David to make this loan. It was a nice, clean, simple transaction. And I point this out to you because when you're thinking about making a loan to somebody, before you go through all the process, just say, can I make the loan to them? And if you're unsure, call our office. Although, as I've mentioned before, we can't give you advice, but we can give you directions as to what is a prohibited transaction, because that is our area of expertise as it relates specifically to that transaction. And if it gets any deeper than that, of course, you'd have to get some legal input, because ultimately it's between you and your advisors as to whether or not you think it's a prohibited transaction. That's why it's important to have a good team. The loan was secured by the title to the home with the correct vesting and registered with the state to put a notice of lien on the title. What this does is it prevents the borrower from placing loans on the mobile home that are superior to the lien David made with his Roth IRA. These are little things, but they add up to a lot. Secure your interest. It's good, solid business, whether it's the IRA or otherwise. The collection of payments needs to comply with federal law and require an approved third-party servicing company. Now, I put this in here. I'm not going to go into this tonight. You need to be aware that when you're making loans on real estate, you're buying mortgages, or you are making loans on mobile homes, that in many circumstances they're going to require a third-party servicer, and they're going to require you to limit yourself to the number of transactions, and it depends by whether it's owner-occupied or they're rental properties, and it's called the Safe Mortgage Act. You need to get familiar with that if you're going to be in the lending business, because there are some very specific requirements, and a lot of this has to do with what's come out of Washington the last few years in the Dodd-Frank rules and regulations, of the way they're being implemented, not necessarily the way they were intended to be. It's always a slightly different version. So do check into this as to how it relates to your lending business, whether it's IRA-wise or whether it is by just your normal monies or your other type of entities that you may be dealing with to make loans out of. Oddly enough, in this secured loan, there were a lot of key points. And it is a very simple transaction. I made the key points there because I wanted to cover a lot of bases, and A, it relates to the IRA, and B, just good business. As it mentions, there are a majority of these are in fact good business. One thing that a potential IRA investor to remember is that the process is the same whether it's inside the IRA or outside the IRA. As I mentioned, the only difference is that American IRA signs the documents on behalf of your IRA, and all of the loan payments flow back to the IRA. With that in mind, as I've said before, this really is an easy process. Deal 3, April. So we got January, March, and April. So we've accelerated our transactional frequency, let's just say. Now, I put in there the words A, B, and P. From a real estate investing standpoint, from an IRA investing standpoint, just generally speaking across the board, everybody wants to know, how do I find a deal? Where do I go look? Currently you have the people that are saying, well, you can do it all electronically. You can. You can go on online and see all these properties, make offers, and that does in fact work. But there's nothing that works like the good old-fashioned method, which is signs. You've got car signs, direct mail, you've got the internet presence, you've got flyers, you've got driving the neighborhoods. Now, in the old timers, we call that farming. Okay, today it's called guerrilla marketing. And according to Wikipedia, the term guerrilla marketing is easily traced to guerrilla warfare, which utilizes atypical tactics to achieve a goal in a competitive and unforgiving environment. I think the real estate business is a competitive and it's an unforgiving environment. To some extent, the nice thing about real estate is if you hold it long enough, it becomes pretty forgiving. But if you're expecting to turn something over on a short-term basis to make a profit, and you don't do your due diligence like we talked about earlier, it can be a very unforgiving environment. Now, I'm not saying that this is the end-all to be-all for transactions. I'm not saying anything that to deter anybody from doing any type of prospecting. All prospecting needs to be done, but it does need to be done. And the more you go to the root of prospecting, which is what we're going to cover in here, the better your transactions are going to be. And the less competition, I might add. Always be prospecting continued. David knows that there is no magic pool. You can't visit to dip out great deals. There's no magic pool. There are techniques, but there's no magic pool. David also knows that all great investors, and this second paragraph is absolutely key to some of these transactions that you're going to see in these next two coming up. Great deals are not found, they are created. I actually did a presentation a few years ago about a real estate group that for this heading. It's about an hour-long presentation, and it really boils down to that word: the greater, the better, the better the deal, the more you have worked hard at putting it together. And David knows that to keep the pool filled, you must always be prospecting, ABP. And through these prospecting efforts, he has a pool built that's wide, deep, and continuing these activities will ensure that they will never run dry. Sounds silly, but you're going to see why this is all important coming up. Deal 3. David found this property driving through a neighborhood close to downtown Asheville with older homes in an area that has been yuppieized over the last 10 years. And I do want to reemphasize again, everything I'm telling you is absolutely accurate as to my interview with David G., the records that are indicated in our company, and it's so simple that you're going to think it can't be. Well, you're going to have to accept the fact that it is, but it is this simple. David tracked the property for several years. He built rapport with the seller, the old-fashioned way. You meet the seller. You may not always be able to meet the seller, but if you work in your neighborhood, you meet the seller, rapport with the owner and the seller. And patience is a virtue in all forms of investing. The other thing that, if anybody gets offended out there, I apologize, but follow-up is a lost art, and lack of follow-up will cost you deals. That's the bottom line. I didn't run the sales statistics, but I will tell you that many surveys and studies that have been done is many people don't even buy until they been asked, in excess of 7 times, and most people give up after the first time. Oh, that doesn't work. They didn't do it. No money down financing, it does not work. Interest-free financing, it does not work. How many times did you test that? 1 time. Well, of course it's not going to work. Everything works. It doesn't work on every deal. Remember, this is a simple business. Educate yourself, prospect, follow up, close transactions, and then you cash checks. That's the business. If you're keeping track of the money available in David's accounts, you will know his balance is low. He has very little money left because he's bought the land, made the loan, and so what does he do for an investment? Now, this technique you're familiar with. You've heard all kinds of different accounts of what this is called. It's called flipping contracts. It's called assignment of contracts. It's called straight options. It's called wholesaling, and any other name that means getting involved with something quickly and getting out of it. So David decided to use the wholesaling technique. The interesting thing about these transactions is this. David was doing wholesaling previously to getting involved with the IRA. Using many of these same techniques. However, as many people who have IRAs think, and that's why this presentation is designed around a real person, is David, with 2 degrees, highly intelligent, very successful outside of the IRA, had to question, because of the misconceptions of the self-directed IRA as it relates to investing in real estate is so different than what you would do in your own world. So David says one day, he says, well, can I do this? And we said, of course. It's like any other transaction. So David decided to go back to using some wholesaling techniques that he obviously uses on an ongoing basis. The contract purchase price for this particular property was $157,500. The depositor binder, depending on what you guys call it, was $500. David G. entered into a partnership with a new partner for a 50% interest. The partner this time was a solo 401k, also one of our clients, but nevertheless, it was a solo 401k. So now we're partnering a Roth IRA with an entirely different type of retirement account. Each account put up $250 to cover the requested $500 deposit. David G. and his partner submitted all the required documents to American IRA, closed on the property using short-term seller financing. American IRA executed all documents on behalf of the retirement account and issued the checks to the closing attorney for the deposit. Now, how did he close? Well, short-term seller financing. So it's another technique that was brought into this, learned about seller financing. Well, why was the seller willing to close with such a nominal down payment? That's the question that is probably going to crop up in your mind. But of course, the other thing that's going to crop up in your mind is say, people don't do that, sellers don't do that, and understand that sellers do all kinds of things, and buyers do all kinds of things, and we as human beings do all kinds of things that we never would have imagined. David G. aggressively marketed the property to retail and wholesale buyers, and David G., because he did do his homework, he did get a good deal. He and another wholesaler agreed on a price of $176.5 and paid in cash to facilitate the double closing. So the transaction, even though on the surface looks like, well, it's just, it's a simple owner financing. Well, it wasn't as simple as it first appeared. What really took place was the cash came into the transaction. The wholesaler immediately sold the property to a builder. So the reality is the builder brought the cash in. Then it was utilized to pay off the original seller of the property that closed using very, very short term, meaning 5-minute seller financing. The cash came in from the new transaction as the down payment, paid off the seller's note, and they recorded all the deeds at the same time. Now, did David G. figure all this out himself? David G., as you will see, has a team of people and a working knowledge. So what you need to focus on is your working knowledge, and then you put together the team that covers these transactions to make sure they come out correctly and legally. David G. and his partners submitted all required documents to American IRA. American IRA signed the documents on behalf of the retirement account. I know I keep repeating myself on this, but I'm just trying to emphasize to you that the process is the same every time. Within less than 30 days, the builder closed for cash, which allowed David G.'s Roth to cash out for $95. Now, you may think I conflicted with that less than 30 days. I put that in there because I didn't want to go through the depth of how this actually took place. It actually closed the same day. A $9,500 profit from a $250 investment. And some knowledge of how to structure a transaction and some just good, hard, basic real estate work by driving the neighborhood, identifying a property, contacting the seller. And how many people were bidding on this property, you ask? Nobody. David G. had the only negotiating going on with the seller because he found the property, he built rapport, and when the seller was ready to go, he was the person who got the opportunity. And he decided to do it inside of his Roth IRA. The entire transaction was completed via letter of direction, with the American IRA signing on behalf of the Roth and the 401k. And as I mentioned before, the title is called American IRA LLC for the benefit of David's Roth undivided 50%, and now with American IRA LLC for benefit of partner's name solo 401k undivided 50% interest. And this is, I mentioned earlier, this is a great example of parting with two different types of retirement accounts. That 401k could have been a SEP, a Simple, it could have been a Coverdell, it could have been an HSA, it could have been a simple plan. And Any one of those you could have plugged into that particular scenario, but this is the exact transaction. When partnering, the IRS requires that all profits are split according to actual investment. Income shifting is not allowed. I mentioned that earlier, and I repeat again, because in many circumstances, if you're investing in something under non-IRA circumstances, you do have the ability, if you have a partnership or an LLC, to actually allocate the funds, the profits, and the tax deductions differently than the actual percentages. So, but with the transaction being involved with an IRA, it must be split according to the actual ownership. Key points from the sale of the wholesaler. The Roth, and this is the part about diligence that I want to make sure that we're clear on, is the Roth IRA obtained title insurance, fire insurance, surveyed the property, and all the costs were paid for by the Roth IRA according to the percentage owned, in this case 50%. All agreements were in writing, including between the two retirement plans. Professionals were used to prepare all documents, appropriate insurance, surveys, and sales contracts. This step is not required. We, of course, will ask you to sign a waiver because you're not using a professional, but we're not going to, and when it's all said and done, it's ultimately up to you. This step is not required. It is still good business practice to ensure you protect your interest in the investment. And when we get into the advanced area of this, this is going to jump out off the screen like you will not believe when we get into the advanced section of this, because there is a transaction that is the perfect case study of why you do your due diligence to get yourself out of something whole and with a profit. David G. and his partner also did their due diligence prior to entering into the purchase contract with the seller. And we've talked about due diligence and given you a basic guideline. No investment is fail-proof. I'm going to repeat that. No investment is fail-proof. However, due diligence can stack the odds very heavily in the investor's favor. Always say to yourself, how do I get out if all goes wrong? Warren Buffett's famous quote is, rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. I think it's well said. Deal number 4. Here we go. Practice makes perfect. Home run, hat trick, hole in one, 100-yard run back, and game-winning shot from half court. You'll see why I called it that. By the way, notice that was May 2007. Deal 4 in a little over beginning of May, so a little over 5 months, a little less than 5 months. Deal 4, value added. One of the common denominators you may have noticed is that there's several value added opportunities that David G. gets involved with. And David G. is moving into intermediate area of self-directed IRA investing with this purchase. To a large extent on the last purchase, and this one is even further. David G. is an active ABP practitioner and found this house from a personal referral that he cultivated. So he's out there talking to people, letting them know what they do, what he does, what he's looking for. I buy real estate, I borrow money, whatever the case may be. He's letting people know what he does. And we often overlook the simplest steps, and letting people know what we do is painless and nicely. It doesn't cost anything except a business card. And even that doesn't necessarily need to be done. Just tell them what you do and give them your phone number on a sheet of paper. If you have noticed in all previous deals, David G. had his Roth IRA purchase assets, or what I call value-added opportunities. That's his term, my term, and I think you're either familiar with that or you should become familiar with that in the real estate business. A value-added opportunity is something that doesn't rely on inflation, appreciation, or anything else. It's the way to great wealth in real estate is to buy right? Still, buying right will only get you so far. By investing in value-added properties, you will, to a large extent, control your own appreciation. And the way that works is you can raise rents. You can, in this case, do lot splits and sell off the additional lots. You can update the property. You can add rooms or room additions. Anything to improve or reposition the property whether it's a single-family dwelling to apartment buildings, it doesn't matter. It's all the same fundamentals. That's the nice thing about the real estate business. There are deviations to what you need to do and need to learn, but the reality is everything's fundamentals, and the fundamentals are in this presentation. And you will get lots of that through your local investment club, as we've already discussed. In the previous deals, each of these has similar value-added features, and as I mentioned, David is a big believer in value-added strategy. The ironic thing is, he does it just knowing that it's got extra lots. So it's a pretty good strategy. All successful investors know there are critical steps are necessary to win at investing. Prospect for a good deal. Once again, follow up. Do your homework. And the most overlooked function, I put this in there, and like I say, don't be offended, but believe it or not, many investors don't make offers. They look at property, and they get hung up on the question, why should the seller accept this offer amount? As investors, we're not trained to read minds or do psychoanalysis of the seller. David G. knows this key to success is making an offer he can live with. And that's the bottom line. You can look at the property, you can talk to the seller, you can analyze the seller, or you can look at the offer, look at the property, determine what you can do with this particular property, make the offer that is appropriate for this situation, whether it's a flip, a hold, or whatever you guys decide to invest in. Make the offer. The nice thing about making an offer is two things. Number one, they could accept it. If they reject it, it's likely that they'll tell you what they want for the property. And if it's an outright rejection, they do not eat you and they do not kill you. They just reject your offer. That's it. And you move on to the next one. You may have missed the most important part of this deal. David G. made an offer and the seller accepted. The purchase price on this particular property was $75,000. And once again, this is all documented in my files, requiring a deposit of $500. And David's pretty well got this $500 deposit down. Now, in this case, we're going to talk about partnering three different people. The people being David G.'s Roth IRA, a 50% interest. He put up $250 through his Roth account, $175 from his partner's solo 401k, bought a 35% interest, and the partner put up $75 hard cash out of his own pocket and received a 15% interest in the transaction. Now, why did the partner do that instead of doing all of his solo 401k? It's simple. First, you can do it at the time of acquisition, and second, by doing this, he gets to put away 15% of the profit in his pocket currently, and he still gets to put 35% into his retirement plan for his future. So this is a good strategy for the folks out there that say, well, I don't want to put all the money back into my retirement account. I'd like to have some currently. Great. Simple. Partner with yourself on the transaction, take 10 or 20% of the deal, put up the money, and then you get 10 or 20% of the money or whatever percentage you want, and move forward. So that's a good way to get some current income, just as a little side note here. David G. and his partner, once again, submitted all the required documents. For the boring purposes, if you notice, I've made my points now, so I narrowed it down to submitted all the required documents to American IRA. I do appreciate the fact that sometimes it gets tedious going back and forth over the documentation thing, but it is the critical part of you telling us what to do. American IRA executed all documents on behalf of the retirement account, issued checks to the closing attorneys for the deposit. Okay? So far, very simple. The vesting was split three ways, as I told you, 50%, 35%, and 15% for the three different partners. And once again, the expenses must be split in relationship to the ownership percentage, 50, 35, and 15. and the profit and the expenses according to the actual percentages. That's critical, and that's why I keep emphasizing it in these partnership deals. And properly identifying the ownership percentage from the beginning, that's in the contract, will prevent the IRS from disqualifying the tax-exempt status of your IRA. So it's set up in advance. David G. once again did business with another investor who planned on reselling the property. The nice thing about this, if you'll notice, is you can call this wholesaling if you want. It fits that category because that's the category it is. But the transactions are so strong that the wholesaler or the investor that's buying this and reselling it to a retailer is happy to buy the property because there's a lot of, in quotes, meat left on the bone. If you're going to get involved with something, you got to make sure that A, you get a great deal so it's attractive to other investors and retail people, and B, you leave something there for the new investor so that if they plan on moving the property, that they have the upside to do their job and attract a retail buyer. So greed is not something that is beneficial in a scenario like this. It's more important to leave something for somebody else, make a nice profit, and when you do that, nobody cares how much you make. And David G. and his partner agreed to sell a property and entered into a contract to purchase for $175,000. Okay? Yes, he paid $75,000. He entered in a contract, and I don't know exact time frame, but it was fairly quick. $175,000, and as always, and I say always, David G. used professionals. He has a team. They drafted the documents. They did the title search. They draft and oversee the closing, record the deeds, and they purchase title and fire insurance. Always. Trust me when I tell you this. Anytime you break the fundamental chain of rules, like dealing with getting all your proper documents, that is the one deal that will come back to haunt you in your investing career. I promise you this. And how do I know that? Take a guess. The investor brought $75,000 plus cost to close the $175,000 purchase. Okay? So David G. didn't put up any money. So he actually sold it to the investor. And that $75,000 was the down payment and the purchase price to the seller. So the seller gets cashed out at closing. That was step one. Step two, David G. and his partner agreed to hold a first mortgage of $100,000 of the purchase price. And yes, that is correct. $100,000 more than they paid. This was a no interest, no payment, short-term loan to the investor until the investor finished his sale for cash, at which time David G. and his partner will be paid in full. It took the investor several months to get it closed. It closes approximately December of 2007. And David G.'s Roth received a check from the closing attorney for $49,750. And that's for a $250 investment. And of course, that's his half. The other half went to his partner, of which 35% went to the 401k. And keep in mind, of that 15% of the profit went to the gentleman in his pockets from current income, which is what he wanted. And you're trying to figure out, what did you miss? Nothing. David G. increased the value of his tax-free, never to be taxed Roth by $49,750 from an initial investment of $250. With proper education, which David did, patience, which is how he finds these deals, and dedication, which is follow-up. Anyone can do this. Anyone. I don't see anything in here that can't be duplicated and applied on a consistent basis, which is the other thing, that if you're looking at these transactions, these techniques are applied on a consistent basis, and that's why these deals are so successful. I want to go back through the key points. There were several notable techniques used in this deal: partnering with other self-directed retirement accounts, partnering with a solo 401k, which we talked about, partnering with a prohibited person. The prohibited person that you may be questioning, who is prohibited? Well, a prohibited person, remember, would be the gentleman who has a solo 401k. The solo 401k could not deal directly with the beneficiary, which is what in this case we're going to talk about the prohibited person. But at the time of acquisition, they were able to acquire the property, and he could take a personal interest in the property. So that's what I'm talking about. So it covered different type of accounts, partnering at the time of acquisition with what could be potentially in another environment, a prohibited transaction, and then owner financing. In the owner financing was from David G. and his partners' accounts to the new investor. Owner financing using no interest to facilitate the deal. And I put this in here because I wanted to make some commentary on mindset. This is not, as you may have noticed, there's a lot of IRA stuff, but there's a lot of just basic real estate investing in here, and this is my intention. If you're a beginning investor or a person from that's just been introduced to creative type of thought that has not yet done deals or has done deals in a very conventional way, okay, I hear this frequently because I say, let's start off with no interest to the offer to the seller. Well, they're not going to accept that. How do you know? Well, when you have a situation like this particular transaction was set up to facilitate the closing. If the deal is right, the interest doesn't matter. What I'm saying by that is don't trip over the pennies to get to the dollars. Basically, it's this. I hear across the board, and I'm not throwing out anything as it relates to hard money lending that is promoting it one way or the other, because I don't recommend products. But let's talk about private party lending, better known as hard money lending. And the definition of hard money lending is anything that's not purchased money. You may not know that. So whether it's a private party loan or, in quotes, a hard money loan, it's in fact hard money. In this case, the financing was used merely for the investor to hold the property until he resold it to the buyer for cash. Think of it as like a long-term holding. But the other mindset is, well, the hard money lender wants 13% in X number of dollars for costs up front. I'm not going to pay 13% when I can get it at the bank at 5%. Well, here's the rub. You can't get it at the bank for 5%. Number one. And number two, the terms, conditions, and speed are what makes the hard money attractive. And third, in most cases, when you're using that type of money, it's going to be a short-term deal. It's a cost of doing business. And where else are you going to get the money? And you have to pay a partner even more money. So focus on the deal. Build your cost in either interest or no interest, depending on the way you're going to do it. And you don't need to charge interest like David G. here. He didn't need to charge interest for 7 months. Would anybody reject a profit on a property of $100,000 and giving a guy 7 months worth of free interest, or 5 months, or whatever it took to close it? I submit to you that I don't think I'm going to get too many volunteers here that are going to say they would not do that. So just think about it like that. And the same thing with the hard money. If you have a situation where you're going to need financing, it's all part of doing business. You build the cost of the money into the deal. And when the deal's good enough, it's evident right there. Okay? So that's some fundamentals. The reason the Roth IRA will never be taxed. This account of David's has now been established for more than 5 years, and I realize it includes us, but previous to that, a Roth that he had are not excluded. So the Roth IRA, once you establish it, it's 5 years from the time you establish the original Roth. So you may have a Roth now with a securities firm, and you decide you want to move it over to a self-directed provider such as American IRA, and we hope that you do. Well, that 5 years is already ticking. If you open an account today and you've never had one, the 5 years starts from the time you opened it. So it's a 5-year time frame to become tax-free. That's part one. Part two is you must reach 59 and a half. Okay? Those are the two considerations. So to be clear is if you are currently 58 years old, a mere child, I might add, then you cannot have a fully tax-free account till you're 63. That's the 5 years and 59 and a half. David G. will not be taking any distributions before he's 59 and a half, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's the other consideration, having it absolutely tax-free. And here's a little tidbit of information that you can just put away in the back of your mind. I wanted to point this out because it's one of the nice or features about a Roth. I don't know if it's nice because it does have its downside, which we're going to discuss. You can always withdraw the cash contributions from a Roth IRA without paying any taxes because the taxes were paid prior to you depositing the money into a Roth IRA. Let me rephrase. If you had $5,000 a year, you put it away for 4 consecutive years, you'd have $20,000 in the account. You may have made $50,000 on that $20,000. You can withdraw the $20,000 without any penalties or taxes because you've already paid the taxes. So if you have an emergency, that money would be there. The profit, however, is subject to the rules I just laid out to you, 5 years and 59 and a half. Now, David G's contributions, as we know, were 12.8 to his Roth IRA and the withdrawal without any tax consequences anytime he chooses. However, when you think about using this strategy, you also have to, don't just consider, well, gosh, I can get this money tax-free and I could use it for a new Ferrari. Maybe it's, old Ferrari, but nevertheless a Ferrari. However, keep in mind that David G decides to do this, he will miss the tax-free compounding for the rest of the Roth IRA's existence. And it would take about 3 years in David G's situation to replenish those through regular contributions, and they would not be compounding tax-free. So there is a consequence to taking the money out. The tax situation is minimal. I would say that if you didn't have a absolute near-death reason to take out the money, then I would say that you may want to consider not doing it and just working around whatever the needs are. Remember, a wise investor always weighs their options and risks when deciding whether to accept a deal. In this case, think about the deal. David G had nothing to lose by accepting this offer. The investor paid $75,000 cash to close. That allowed David G and his partner to purchase the property. And they didn't really purchase the property. They had it under contract, so it went directly to the investor through once again, a modified double closing. I'm not going to get into double closings. We'll get to that in the advanced section. If the investor did not pay off the first mortgage held by David G and his partner, then David G and his partner would own a free and clear property. So once again, my theory is that there's no such thing as risk-free investing. But diligence will, in fact, put the odds in your favor. I would say in this case, what would you determine the risk to be in this case? I'll leave that to you to answer that question. Now, how do you get on board of this train to make these type of transactions? Number one, once again, educate yourself. You're a member or should be a member of the Atlanta RIA or your local RIA that provides education and opportunity to you. The other thing you can do is, and for Atlanta RIA members, it's $50 is waived for, you'll see it on when you go to our website, is waived for Atlanta RIA members. That's a benefit that we have given to the Atlanta RIA membership only. And if you're not a member, you can join, and you would, of course, be saving the $50. I don't know what, I believe Dustin charges $100. When you pay $100 and you get and open an account, and you save $50 from us. So you're really getting a year's membership for $50. I don't know how much better you can do than that, and be in the loop for all the educational opportunities. You go to, by the way, I'm a big proponent of the local RIAs. I'm not saying this because you know, Atlanta RIA is putting on this presentation. I'm the past president of my local RIA. Okay, first thing I did when I moved to my area was join the RIA. I didn't even live here. I was just going to be here for a while, and I joined the local RIA. The reason was I wanted to know, natural curiosity, what's going on, and be around like-minded people. Because when you talk about real estate, many times eyes glaze over. So to open an account, you go to AmericanIRA.com and you click our Easy IRA Opening Kit. There it is right there. And you can call our offices. We will email it to you. We will walk you through the forms. We will help you fill out all the necessary documentation. We'll answer all your questions clearly and concisely. And we will do it over and over again until you are absolutely comfortable with both the process and what takes place. That's the value-added service that we believe that we work hard at, making the process, as I mentioned earlier, easy. I want to thank you for attending this presentation, and I hope that this has been an informative presentation. And I'm going to take all the phone calls, or excuse me, all the questions that you want until you don't have any more questions or Dustin shuts us off.
We do have some questions, and thank you for that great presentation. Very detailed. All right, this first question was from Terrence.
Hi, Terrence.
Can a real estate investor borrow money from another individual who has funds in their self-directed IRA?
Yes, they can, and that's a common way to generate capital for real estate investing. I didn't cover that tonight, but if you think about the second case study I did, that was a individual borrowing money from an IRA. It'll be no different than if that individual was a investor.
Okay, and he has a follow-up question to that. He said, if that is possible to borrow money from others in their IRA, is there any geographic limitations on this? I.e., could a real estate investor borrow funds from an individual from their self-directed IRA in Georgia to buy a property in North Carolina?
There is no geographical restrictions. The IRA is a federal program, so there's no issues with us, and we do transactions. As I mentioned, we're a national company. We just opened an account from San Francisco, so we do business all over. So it doesn't really matter. The process is the same for us. The only issues about borrowing money is you just need to talk to your professional about how that is affected by any rules and regulations about borrowing money from and how you solicit it. But if it's from a person you know and you in the past, then it shouldn't be any issue whatsoever. But yes, you can do it across state lines across the country.
Yep, that's what he sounded like. He was concerned about doing stuff across state lines and different states' SEC rules and regulations.
No, there's only I'm not going to shed much light on this right now. I'm actually going to cover a lot more in the advanced section because the David G story, as you saw, was great for case studies, but the interjections were of course mine, and I'm going to do the same thing in the advanced section. It's going to be it will be advanced and it will be creative. I promise you should show up. The SEC situation is, and I got to throw this out, I'm not an attorney, but the SEC situation is there's very specific rules and regulations. But if you're soliciting for people who are not people you know, then you could have a problem. If you call me up and I happen to be your uncle, okay, and say, hey, uncle, will you loan me $50,000 to do this real estate deal? Not a problem. It could be in California. It could be anywhere in the country. It does not matter because I'm not out there actively soliciting or advertising. And as long as you don't start guaranteeing me all this stuff, you can't use the words like, I'm going to guarantee this to you. I'll do all the work. And then you have an expectation, and then it could create some issues. So what you're doing is the person needs to make a loan. You present a package to them and let them make the investment decision. So those are just the cursory overview of what you would be looking for. But I would say 99.9% of the time in that scenario, you're not going to have an issue. But once again, you do need, if it's more cutting edge than that, you need to do some basic study on it.
All right. This next question was from Mike. Can one invest in their own property, or does it need to be into someone else's?
Okay. The question is can I? Once again, we talked about prohibited transactions. So you cannot buy from yourself, sell to yourself, or buy or sell to any type of prohibited persons, as I described in the presentation. So the answer would be, as I understand the question, you could not invest in your own currently owned property. It would have to be a newly purchased asset that you had not previously owned, as a general comment.
All right, and this was one more question from the same gentleman, Mike. He said, can you roll multiple IRAs, both regular and Roth, into one IRA with American IRA?
You can roll all your traditional IRAs into one traditional IRA with us. The Roth IRAs need to have their own account. So you could roll all your Roths into one and all your traditionals into one. So it would require two accounts because there are two different types of pools of money. One's tax deferred and one is tax paid and tax free coming out.
Okay, we got a few more questions. So if you guys have any more questions, send them in now. We got 3 left. This one's from Lori. She said, I've been laid off. Will I have to pay penalties if I use my traditional or Roth IRA? I have both.
Well, the laid off portion, of course, doesn't have any bearing on the penalties, but if you are under 59 and a half, and it sounds like by the question you are, then, let's deal with the traditional first. With the traditional IRA, you would, if you take the money out, you will pay a 10% penalty and you will pay any income taxes that are associated with that. With the Roth IRA, you will pay a 10% penalty and on any monies that come out that is not the original principal contribution like I described to you. So once again, if you get into a situation where you've made contributions to this Roth over the years, then you'll have an idea of how much you contributed. Let's say it is that $20,000 that I gave as an example in the presentation. Then you would be able to pull that $20,000 out without penalty and without taxes. So that would give you a little pool of money to work with if you needed to in an emergency situation. Now, if you wanted to go further than that, call my office and I'll chat with you personally about another strategy, possibly using a 401k, but that is a different conversation.
Okay, and we got 2 more questions. These are both from Mark. So if you guys have any remaining questions, please send them in now. Mark asked, how fast can you get a check cut for a deal?
Very fast. We have the cash in hand, and you want a check. We could we schedule our fundings on a twice a week basis just for convenience, because the clients usually, we have to have the documents to review and the closings, but we can cut a check anytime that we need to or want to. And so we can cut it right. If you were to send us the proper documentation tomorrow morning, we could have it. And my staff is going to kill me, okay, putting this out in the air. We could have it the same day in FedEx. Now we don't do that on an ongoing basis because it would create havoc. But if you needed it, we can do it. Does that answer the question?
Mark, let us know if that answered your question. And Mark had another question: can the check that's cut be picked up locally or printed locally?
Actually, that's a great question. If you happen to be in the greater Asheville area, yes. Now, as far as printing locally in your area, I actually looked into that, and there is we don't have that capacity right now to do that. If you're asking because you're looking at doing some foreclosure work or tax lien work or stuff like that, I do have an outstanding solution to that, but I'd rather talk about it on the phone than I would put it out on the air, because it's a little bit more complex than what I want to put for this first section. But I do have a solution for that if that's what your question is surrounding, about how fast can I get this and how can I act in a timely fashion. And so just give us a call and I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Is that, I know that's not as good an answer as you'd like, but I would appreciate it if you just give me that call, and I'll take all the time you need to walk you through the process.
Well, he wrote back and said, yes, especially when you're doing earnest for REO, HUD properties, or with the seller. Yeah,
that's what I assumed your question was. And there is a way that we can to deal with that. There's two different fashions. And once again, this is a beginning to intermediate. And I just as soon not introduce any advanced concepts here. I'd like to keep it to the advanced section. But I encourage you to call me, and I will be delighted to go over this with you.
Okay, Mark, give him a call. Jim's contact information is there on the screen. We had one last question just come in. And this is, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. It's T-E-J, Tej? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. How does this work with a rehab property? Who rehabs? Do you just hire a contractor?
Yeah, that's one of the common questions we get is who does the rehab work? You as the beneficiary of the IRA cannot provide goods and services to the IRA. So in other words, you can't do the actual physical work yourself. You can oversee the transaction, you can hire the contractors and so forth, but you need to have the rehab done by a contractor or a handyman or whatever term you want to use. And the disbursements need to come directly from the IRA. They can't come from you. So those are some basic guidelines. And back to the real estate investing hat. Here's the thing. There are many people who actually like to do the work themselves. And if that is a deal breaker, then the self-directed IRA is not going to work for you, because it's plainly a transaction that's prohibited from doing. However, the other second part of this statement that has to do with real estate investing is, the reality is, if you have to provide the labor yourself to make the deal pencil out, in quotes, then you may want to take another look at the deal. If it doesn't cover management, maintenance, vacancy, rehab, whatever the costs are, the actually ownership of this property, then you may want to take a look at your deal and say, is this really a good deal, or am I squeezing it? And not taking into consideration my particular labor or my management skills or something like that. That's just a commentary. It's not a real answer to the IRA. The first part was the actual IRA answer.